Welcome to Good Grief, where the most uncomfortable emotions are made comfortable and normal. So I'm Megan Keller, and this is Ariel.
I'm Ariel Nelson.
And we're both students at BYU, Idaho. We're both marriage and family studies majors.
Yeah.
I'm specifically going into counseling, marriage counseling, family counseling. That's just where I'm headed.
Yeah, and I'm kind of going around the same boat. But specifically, why we're here is just to focus on grief and those normal situations that occur in everyone's day-to-day lives that we don't talk about very often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because especially with grief, there's just this uncomfortable, what do we talk about? How do we talk about this really uncomfortable topic? And we want to make it aware for everyone so that it is normal. It is comfortable for people to talk about. There's 5 specific topics we're going to talk about, especially with grief, because grief isn't just about someone passing away. There's unforeseen financial struggles, there's disability, there's divorce, there's infertility and miscarriage, and then there's obviously death, and all of those pertain to the family dynamic.
Yeah, and like I said before, we really just feel like these are important topics that happen that are completely normal, and we just don't talk about it. We don't talk about what's healthy. We don't talk about what grieving might look like. We don't talk about the coping mechanisms, and these are all things that we want to include in this podcast, and hopefully you guys can find or learn things that might pertain to your life or to someone that you might love, if it helps their situation.
Yeah, so as we go through these episodes, we'll talk about these different ways of coping and these different grieving situations. For this particular episode, we're going to talk about what is grief, what does it look like, who's grieving, what is financial grief, and how do we cope with financial grief? So
first off, we really just want to talk about what is grief, like what does it look like, and is it something that people experience all the time? Like, what does it look like? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's just a lot of sadness. It's just a good hearty ugly cry, and it's really uncomfortable for everyone involved. Yeah. The person that's grieving, the person that wants to help, and then the person that's just to stand by, like, oh my gosh, what's happening?
Yeah.
But I think it's so healthy. It's so natural for us to want to be sad about these traumatizing situations. It's so natural for us to want to figure out how to deal with it. And obviously it's natural for some people to just suppress it and put it away and never want to feel those feelings. Because who does?
Yeah.
So
it's true. When I think of grief, I think of all the times that I've cried, and it's funny because there's just not a moment where tears are not involved for me. Like, I'm a very emotional person. So no matter what kind of situation I'm going through, whether it's happy, sad, excited, like just terrified, tears are coming out. They're full on. Yeah. And I think about my husband, and he doesn't experience anything like that. Tears are not involved. He's the very opposite.
Dry.
Yeah. Dry eyes. He needs some eye drops. But it makes me think about, okay, am I normal? When I cry, is that something that's normal for me? Mm-hmm. Is it normal that my husband doesn't cry? Like, there's just all these things that combine and make me think, okay, what is normal? What isn't normal? So it's just interesting, So
yeah, which can be, it can be really kind of, again, uncomfortable when somebody else is grieving with a situation and you're grieving with maybe the same situation. And like, let's say in a family, you just lost your house because it burned down, and like, your sister is grieving with it maybe better than you are, but it's not It's not better. It's not worse. It's just different, and that's okay. And I think we need to understand that coping and grieving, they just look different.
Yeah, for every person. Something that I really like that we've actually researched, Megan and I, in order to make this podcast, there was a lot of that research that went into this. We spent hours, looking up different topics, and specifically regarding this podcast, finances. We researched what financial struggles might look like, what complicated grief might look like in different scenarios. And specifically, we found something that I think kind of really explains what grief might look like. And that is grief is the emotional response to loss. And if we were to break that down, what is emotion? Emotion could be a number of things. It might be, tears going down your eyes. It might be a smile on your face. It might be laughter. Mm-hmm. I know so many people that laugh in uncomfortable situations because they don't, that's just their response to things. And I might look at that and be like, why are you laughing?
Why are you laughing at this funeral?
Yeah, no. Why are you laughing that a house just caught on fire, or that, you just lost your job? What is happening, Mm-hmm. And the truth is, everyone experiences just different emotional responses to different losses. Mm. Regarding financial situations, I don't think people necessarily view financial struggles as a loss. Mm-hmm. I think they might just view it as unfortunate, oh, it's just a struggle. It's something that people go through, regarding you lose a job, your, account got broken into, your debit card got lost and someone's been spending money on it, or not debit card, but, just different things regarding finances. It is considered a loss to you. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we necessarily have viewed it that way until, at least for me now,
Yeah. And we've totally seen how, this grief, this emotional response to loss is connected, obviously with stress, and stress is connected to poor health and increased mortality and depression and drug consumption, all these other triggers. And it's all because this grief just wasn't dealt with, and it wasn't talked about, and it wasn't handled in a healthy way, or even just, people just don't talk about it with each other. And it just needs to be made more comfortable so that we don't have to deal with all these other things drug consumption, unnecessary drug consumption, and then mortality. These are just things that we can totally avoid if we just address it firsthand.
Yeah, with that thought, I feel like in today's society, a lot more people are willing to be counselors. I actually saw a post the other day that talked about how people want to be counselors, but they don't realize the effects that it has on someone. You're not just talking to someone about how they're feeling or what's going on in their lives. You're literally putting yourself in that situation and trying to help them cope in a healthy way. You are, you're taking on an emotional toll that is hard. This is ugly stuff, and as ugly as it is, it still needs to be talked about. It still needs to be addressed. It's just, are we able to? Are we able to talk about it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's just a whole nother aspect of learning how to talk about it and understanding who is grieving, because sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes they're so good at hiding it and putting on a happy face that we're just unaware, and we just think they're fine because they say I'm fine. But really, in reality, it's just about everyone. Everyone is grieving at some point. And I mean, it could even be someone got a divorce 20 years ago, but they're still grieving. Grieving has no timeline. They're still grieving. They're still learning how to deal with things. For me personally, I lost my mom 10 years ago. And there's still things that I'm learning to grieve with. I'm still learning how to deal with all these emotions, whether it's on my wedding day, those emotions, or when I have my first baby, those emotions. And like those are so intricate and so personal that nobody else could really understand what it looks like. And so, so that's why I need to learn more about myself and how I cope so I can be a strong, independent woman. Let's go.
No, seriously though, I think a lot of people expect you to already know yourself. You should, like, people expect you to already know how you cope in different situations, how you handle different situations, how you might react to, maybe a job loss, or, I don't know, you just don't handle money very well. You should already know these things. But in reality, you're born, you live in your family for 18 plus years, and that's optimistic. Family, I mean, people are no longer experiencing those, a mom and a dad in the home are experiencing multiple different situations.
Right.
But best case scenario, you live in a family, you grow up to 18, and you move out of the house and you're kicked out, and you go to college, you maybe have debt for college, like now you're supposed to handle loans and all that kind of thing,
I don't even know what that means.
Exactly. And there's so much that we're supposed to learn about ourselves and our identity that we might not know, but we're expected to. We're expected to know how to handle situations. We're expected to know how to talk to our loved ones when we're at our lowest low, But who teaches that?
Like, there's not a class in high school or even college that's like, this is what you should do. Like, this is how you should expect life to go. But it's true that there's not like one right way. There's not just one way that works for everybody, and that's how we all cope, and that's how we all grieve. I mean, we are all humans, and so that helps. But as far as, like, especially in the world that we live in, like, there could be a family in Africa they live in a box, and they, what they expect from their lives is just different. It's just different from, like, what we expect as American students. Like, like if someone came up and told me that I was going to live in a box for the rest of my life, that would be traumatic. And I would have to grieve. And I would have to leave my home and, like, all these things that I knew beforehand and expected my life to be. Like, I would have to grieve those things. But for people that live in a third world country, their expectations are just different. And so they will grieve different things differently. And that's okay. Like, it works. And it's good to be different so that we can have a broader scope of what coping looks like.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, I mean, I've been learning in my family stress and coping class here at Brigham Young University, Idaho. Amazing BYUI.
Woo!
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting that people handle different situations. I mean, handle situations differently depending on their perspective. So, like, let's give an example that, you're walking down a trail, you're camping, you're walking down a trail with your friend, and you hear rustle, like what's the word,
Rustle in the trees.
Rustle in the trees, yeah, or the bushes. Like, your first thoughts that come to mind might be completely different than your friends. Like, if I hear rustles in the bushes, I can't think. But anyways, you hear, noises from the bushes. My first thought would be, oh, that's a squirrel, like, no danger, nothing's going to happen, I'm okay. Whereas my friend might think, oh my gosh, there's a bear in the bushes. Mm-hmm. Those are just our immediate thoughts. We automatically assume our bodies are going to react to our thoughts depending on, what we think or anything like something like that. But, it comes out, it's just an acorn, like something completely different. And all of a sudden your body just completely relaxes, both of our bodies, I mean, mine would probably stay the same and yours probably changed, because you thought it was a bear, but it's just an acorn, that fell from the tree. But depending on how our thoughts are, that's how we react. And I think that can be applied to really anything, regarding financial situations. Let's say for this podcast episode, we might think, oh, my house burned down. And I think obviously everyone is going to go through some grieving process regarding, gosh, how am I supposed to handle this? What's in place that can allow me to move past and still keep balance in my life, within my family's life, But in reality, here I am stressing. I'm going to probably grieve. I'm going to be, going to a therapist and just crying about all the things that I lost in my home. Whereas someone else who might go through the same situation might think, okay, yeah, that sucked, but what are the resources around me that allow me to continue on? Okay, I have community members that will reach out. I can build my relationships with them. I can create a better budgeting system that will allow me to prepare in the future for different financial situations, and financial, struggles, or just inconvenient things in life,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, there are resources out there. And so if we're willing to look for those resources and be prepared for whatever situation that comes, I mean, we'll be able to grieve a lot better, it'll be healthier because we're already kind of like aware of the situation. We're aware of what we can do, what we can control, and then we move forward in that direction. And without knowing those resources beforehand, it can make grieving a lot harder. It can make that coping a lot harder. It can take a lot longer, just because sometimes you have to find those resources. Sometimes you do, and that's okay, but it does take longer. So if we're willing to kind of develop this emotional resiliency at first, or even like a financial resiliency, just so that we are aware and prepared for those emergencies, then mourning will be a lot easier. We interviewed a teacher here at BYUI, her name's Sister Janelle Nelson, and she was talking about, it wasn't her own personal experience, but it was, I think, her friend who, her husband passed away, and she was not the one that dealt with the finances. Like, her husband was the one that dealt with finances. And so now she was kind of in this pickle of like, okay, so now I don't know how to, like, I have to figure out all these finances now, and I have to grieve the fact that my husband is gone. And that was a lot, she had to ask for help as far as finances go, because emotionally grieving and then trying to figure out money management. I know for me personally, trying to figure out money management just makes me want to cry. Like, I just want to grieve that by itself. So trying to grieve the fact that her husband was gone and her husband was working and she has to figure out an income, like, it's like a whole new level. So if we're willing to put in the effort to, whether it's put savings away just in case something bad does happen, or maybe it's, I need my husband to teach me how to budget. Like, what does he do? Like, I need to know how to fill out our taxes or whatever, or like, tell me if you have a little, I don't know, treasure chest somewhere, talk to each other, and just develop this preparation and resilience.
Yeah. I remember when my parents got divorced, my mom had to completely change everything within the family. Like, now my dad wasn't, really a part of my life. My mom had to figure out, okay, where am I going to get my main source of income? And not only was that stressful for her, but that was stressful for me, because now she decided she was going to go back to school, get a degree, to hopefully get a job one day that would be able to support all 7 of her children.
Right.
Me being the oldest child, I had to, along with my other siblings, we had to step in and now take care of other responsibilities within the home that we didn't originally have to do. Now I was babysitting my siblings more than I was originally. My siblings, my older sister, not older, but the siblings closest to my age, we had to work together to figure out, okay, how can we make this a balanced system without us completely crashing,
Mm-hmm.
So it was hard, but yeah.
Yeah, it's learning to adjust that system. Those family dynamics have to change. Like in your family's case, like you kind of had to step up and take care of kids, and like the chores and things that you do, or like the traditions that you have are just going to be different. And it's just, yeah, like you have to prepare for those things. That's why it's really good to teach, your kids about finances, and it's good to teach, just different members of your family what's going on in the world. Like, you don't have to taint their innocence, but I mean, you can teach them things and help them understand to the degree that they understand.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's important for them to be able to prepare in that way. You don't have to like tell your kids like, well, dad's gonna die someday, so you better get ready, hang on for your life. But like, you can be like, yeah, so I mean,
there's gonna be some changes.
Yeah.
We're just gonna have to work together to, make sure that we're supporting each other the best way that we can.
Yeah. And it can be like a really sentimental conversation that you have with them, or even just maybe they ask the question, what if my parents die someday? Like, what will I do? And you can talk to them about that. Right. And you can tell them and like answer their curious questions in a way that's obviously not scary and stressful for them, but in a way that's, it can be realistic, it's sentimental.
Yeah. I remember, this is kind of a little bit off topic, but I remember as a kid, I'd have this image, my mom's not answering my calls. She probably got like a car accident, and going through that tiny period of grieving, like tears would be flowing down my eyes. I'm like, mom's dead, like she's not answering me, she's gone. And in a split second, I would think, okay, what do I have to do now that she's not there, even though she, was very well alive. But I had to think, okay, how am I going to feed my siblings? How am I going to, take care of this house? Just all these different things. But in actuality, people go through that, people do experience having to completely change their responsibility regarding finances, regarding roles within the family, all because of one traumatic experience that happened in their lives, or something that they just weren't planning for. And that's hard. I was actually thinking about different symptoms that might come with grief. I was thinking about, I was like, grief might look differently within different people. What does that look like, And I looked at, like the Mayo Clinic, which I'm sure a lot of people know about. But grief can cause poor health within someone, and that poor health might look like high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, and diabetes. And I was thinking about like how when some people grieve, I know for me, like when I'm sad, I actually just want to eat, and it's not healthy. Like when my husband and I were talking about, how are we going to budget things? How are we going to prepare for, like, this is really bad. Like, we'd be low on income, but I would be like, how are we supposed to pay for all these things? And then I'd be like, okay, let's go eat. Like, I need to go eat something, spend more money, Yeah, and it's like, okay, that's not okay, But in all honesty, like, those are just different things that might occur in some people. Grief can also cause stress, and that might look like migraines, insomnia, so not being able to sleep very well, or they might sleep for a long time, which is called chronic fatigue syndrome. And so there's like more physical prominent, symptoms like back pain, neck pain, knee pain, irritable bowel syndrome. And I actually know quite a few people that have this problem with their body, which I thought was really interesting. It's more common than I had thought, The more you know, the more people the more you recognize just how often it occurs in people's lives.
Yeah. So. Well, and it's interesting because stress can specifically trigger, especially how you're able to focus on things, all the things you just listed physically. I remember I used to work with adults with disabilities. I also used to work with preschoolers with autism, and we would do this. It's kind of like a screening where if it was the beginning of the school year, we would have new students come in, and they would kind of have to go through a series of tests to see if they actually had autism, because there were some kids that genuinely, it wasn't necessarily that they had ADHD or that they had autism, but it was genuinely just because their family life was kind of all over the place. And that's just how they were reacting. Like, they weren't listening and they weren't able to focus because their body was in survival mode. And they were just trying to figure out life at such a young age. And it's sad because at the time I wasn't able to really do anything about it because that wasn't my job. But if we could get a job, I mean, we have jobs out there, but if we could really make it more normal to recognize stress, whether it's migraines or insomnia or chronic fatigue or irritable bowel syndrome, like if we could, instead of just treating those specific physical ailments and just go straight to the source of, oh, it's a stressful family situation, then we would cure, then we wouldn't have to deal with those ailments in the first place.
That's so true. Like going to the source rather than fixing the small problems that might just occur again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely think that's the case. I mean, how are you supposed to fix a problem if you don't know what the problem is? Exactly. If you might look at the surface and be like, oh man, I'm hurting there, and you just see your skin, but it's completely fine, you're going to assume, oh, my skin's okay. But in reality, you have a broken bone underneath that needs to be fixed, Like, that's the same thing with grief, like if you're, like you were just saying, if you're experiencing back pain or knee pain, or you're like having the hardest time sleeping. I know that I do when I'm completely stressed. I have such a hard time falling asleep. But if I were to just address, okay, what am I stressed about? What is going on in my life that I need to talk to someone about, or that I need to, I guess, address, maybe that will help me be healthier in life. Maybe I won't want to go to McDonald's every single day, and eat my feelings away, So, but yeah, I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, just discovering different things about what helps you cope. Because obviously, like, for me too, like eating, I could be so sad, but eating would probably cure my woes. But I've also learned through experience and trial and error that working out does the exact same thing. Like, I can be super stressed about an exam or like failing an exam and be super stressed and like grieving over that. But once I go and like get my blood pumping and like I'm punching bags and things, that helps me. And then I can go home and be like, okay, like I can breathe, I can sleep, I don't have to worry about it. Like, I got my energy out, I got my stress out, and I feel good, you know? And I think if we're willing to discover if we're willing to just try it out, even if it doesn't work, like it can be, maybe you go bicycling and you fall every 5 seconds. Like, yeah, that's probably not the best coping mechanism for you. But that doesn't mean there's nothing else. You can try other things. There's therapy, there's multiple types of therapy. And it's just, again, going to those resources, going to try those things out to discover more about yourself.
Yeah, I had this thought while you were talking about how sometimes, like, regarding, just stepping away from what's happening in your life, regarding, you going to exercise, you're taking that moment to just focus on you. Okay, maybe take your mind off of those stressors in life, take your mind off of what might be happening in the moment, and focus, not in the moment, because you want to focus on, okay, what am I touching right now? Honestly, I remember having anxiety attacks a couple of years ago, and the best thing that would help me get through those moments where my mind was just not functioning was forcing myself to think about what is surrounding me. What are 5 things that I can see, 4 things that I can touch, 3 things that I can hear, 2 things that I can taste and 1 thing that I can smell. A lot of the times, the things that I can taste were my tears, you know, but that's great, you know, just my bad teeth because I haven't brushed in a while. Depression like takes over, but being able to focus on in the moment kind of things allows me to refresh, think more clearly, and focus on, okay, how can I solve that problem that was giving me such a hard time before? You know, I think being able to go exercise, you know, maybe going and experiencing wholesome recreational activities, you know, with your family, or even if you can't afford it, being able to just go on a hike, you know, around the neighborhood, go on a walk around the neighborhood, you know, maybe go throw rocks at the river nearby, or even just like drawing, like trying to draw something all at the same time. Like those are just fun things that you can do as a family that will help you come together, bond with your family, and forget about what was causing so much imbalance in your life to begin with. You know, you focus on the thing that is balancing your life, and then maybe you can solve the problem better, more effectively.
Right. And it can be as big as like you go do a service project for your neighbor, like they're moving in and you go help them move and it takes all day. And then you feel so good about not focusing on your problems. Or it could be like going back to your like teeth thing. Like maybe you do that exercise and you realize, oh man, I just want to brush my teeth, and you go brush your teeth. And that is relieving.
Yes.
Like it would just be like little things that bring you relief and give you a sense of accomplishment. And then you're able to kind of push forward and give you the motivation to do just 1%, just one little thing to get you there. You don't have to be completely healed in one day. It's going to take time, and it's going to take effort, and it's hard. And sometimes you take a step back one day, and that's okay, as long as you're willing and knowing that you're going to proactively try to take a step forward tomorrow.
Yeah, you're making the effort to make a change for the better.
Right.
I totally like that. Yeah.
I like the quote from an article from 2012, and it says, mourning refers to the expression or practices of grief in a given society or culture. And mourning is what you do. Like grief is the emotion, and then mourning is what you do with that emotion. And if you're willing to do things that are proactive, then that grief, you know, you're able to heal. Grief is never going to go away.
No.
Grief will always be there, whether it's job loss, whether it's, we will talk about these other topics, but infertility, like you're just not able to have babies, or the death of a loved one, like it will never go away, and you'll always have days where you just like break down, and that's okay. But you also need to realize that mourning, it's just what you do with those feelings, and it's what you do to, whether, you know, feel those feelings, or it's what you do to distract yourself from those feelings, or etc. Mourning is just what you do.
Yeah. And of course, we've said this before, but mourning looks differently with everyone. And as we continue to grow, and as we continue to learn about ourselves a little bit more, we can understand, okay, what are some things that might help me, I guess, grieve better? And I think there are ways that you can grieve better. There are unhealthy ways of grieving, and there are healthy ways of grieving, you know? And depending on how you're mourning, I mean, a lot of people, when, you know, a family member dies, their form of mourning is probably reflecting on the memories that they had together, you know, or, I mean, regarding finances, some mourning might be, okay, what was I able to do with what I had, and what can I do now, you know? I think a lot of it is just a lot of reflecting. And so if you are going through financial difficulties, are you reflecting in a healthy way? Or are you reflecting in a way that is taking you steps back? You know, are you living in the past, or are you reflecting on the past and growing? If that makes sense.
Yeah, because that reflection can deter you, or give you fear, or it can motivate you in the right direction.
So regarding basically grief and finances. I know a lot, of what's happening today. We know from research that more than 50% of marriages end in divorce. But why is that? And honestly, research has shown that the number one reason for divorce is because of finances. So why might couples be struggling with finances to begin with?
Yeah. And the research that we've seen, specifically from an article from 2012, says by the 1990s and 2000s, marital roles have become less traditional and beliefs about the relationships between partners have become somewhat unclear. And I can totally see that. Like we totally have this, like, a feminist movement that's up on the uprise.
And I think feminism was great,
Yeah. I'm all about ladies power. Don't get me wrong.
All about ladies working and, being able to support themselves and stuff like that. But I definitely think, at least nowadays, it's no longer women just supporting themselves. It's now, and this is a whole nother topic, but they no longer depend on the man to do certain things in their lives.
Yeah. Yep. Because it definitely used to be like in the Industrial Revolution, there was just like the men went to work and they went to their jobs, and that it was just natural for the woman to stay home and take care of the kids. Because that's kind of how women were able to feed their children. They had to stay with the children, and so the men would go and bring in an income, and that's just kind of naturally how it fell into place.
Yeah, I feel like, of course I haven't experienced myself, but from, other people explaining, the guy would make money, he would be the one to budget, and his wife would be there to support, but essentially the woman would be at home doing all the responsibilities within the home and taking care of the kids, raising the kids to be, good, responsible citizens of, the world. Those kids grow up to later learn how to budget, and it continues. It's an ongoing cycle, but somewhere in that line, children were no longer taught how to budget within the home because there was no longer parents who did that together. Those rules switched, and now I feel like, at least with my experience in high school, I'm not taught how to budget. I'm not taught how to, cook, or I feel like I hear about stories where high schools would, teach about budgeting or cooking or woodworks and all this other natural world necessities. You need to know how to budget, you need to know how to do these things, but now we're not taught that. And I especially don't think we're taught that in families anymore, especially with all the rise of divorce rates and, I guess, different family dynamics and different roles.
And I think we do live in an individualistic, especially in America, we live in this be your own individual and focus on that. And a lot of people correlate with that towards their career. And so everybody's kind of looking for where they fit in as far as where can they make money. And obviously, in America, everywhere you need money to survive. So, and knowing how to manage that money is just a different topic altogether. I think there's a lot of focus on how to make money, but as far as learning how to manage that money, maybe there should be more of a focus on that. And that would totally help with, especially in these unexpected situations where you don't have any money anymore, or you don't have that income anymore. If you understand beforehand how to manage that money and how to keep savings, then you'll be prepared and you'll be able to understand that grieving process better.
Definitely. I just think that we really need to talk about, okay, how do we prepare ourselves for these situations? And it's interesting to think about with research and stuff. We had, World War II, men went off to war. Now the women had to take over. They had to learn how to budget. They had to learn how to save and do all the things that men did. And that's great. I think that women need to learn how to do that, so that in cases where you do end up with a death within the family, you know how to respond to those situations. But I feel like we're not addressing that anymore. We're no longer I don't know. I think,
Yeah. Well, and it's just because I don't know, it's not super comfortable, We're naturally falling into these things of where it's comfortable, what's natural and normal, and when it's kind of outside that natural barrier, it can be really uncomfortable to try and learn something new or try something new. And so, therefore, we just put it to the side and tell ourselves, like, I'll do it later. Like, I'll worry about it later. Like, I'm just going to focus on what I'm doing right now, where I'm headed right now. And we just are on this path until an obstacle arises. And then we regret those couple days ago, like, oh, maybe I should put savings aside, or maybe I should start, preparing for if there is a fire, or if I do lose my job, maybe I should. And you regret it. You regret that thought. You're not the thought. You regret not acting on the thought.
Yeah. The more resources that you have, the better chance you have at coping with your struggles. So if one of those resources is having a budget, if one of those resources is having the knowledge of how to go about saving money for different situations, you're going to cope way better than the person who doesn't know those things, or who wasn't prepared for those things. And I think that's just something that is important to keep in mind. Are you prepared for those kind of situations? Are you prepared for when, we kind of talked about different financial circumstances might be. And that's natural disasters. So hurricanes, and, we know that that's happening today. Earthquakes, fire on a house, flooding, so all these things. And then you have robbery, you have disability with the family, death within the family. You have to pay for hospital bills, for caskets, for the funeral services, and fertility. I know so many women who have to pay for those treatments to hopefully eventually be able to have one child. And that's hard, You have to prepare yourself for those things. If you're not prepared, it's going to be even harder,
Especially because it's an emotional thing, and it's those physical, like, you have to deal with that money and where it's going to go and how you're going to deal with the money you don't have anymore. Like that, grieving that loss. There's a lot of emotions that come with it, and just a lot of reality that comes with it as well.
Yeah, and money, of course, isn't everything. But personally, I believe it does help, Yeah. People say money can't buy happiness, but I really do believe that money can buy some happiness,
If you know where to shop, it can buy some happiness.
Right. But honestly, it's sad. People lose their jobs. People, didn't prepare for retirement. And that's hard,
Or people go into a job, but they don't expect the boss to be a jerk, or they don't expect this coworker environment to be toxic, and then they have to leave their job or they have to make that difficult decision of, should I keep this job, or should I leave and find something else? And those are things you just don't expect until it happens.
Yeah. And
then you have to go into this. You have to kind of shift your paradigm and shift your perspective on and adapt to what's happening to you right now.
And unfortunately, children are dragged along, right, with their parents. You experience a very toxic environment where the job doesn't even pay that much. Now you're taking that stress that you have at home and possibly implementing it into the stress that you had in the work environment, taking it into your home. And now your children are stressed because you're stressed, all because of some financial and work environment that you just weren't expecting.
Yeah. And so now the child has to figure out how they're going to cope with it. And sometimes they just don't know. They just aren't aware of what they can do. And especially if the parent is unaware of that they are stressed in general, or that they are grieving in general, then they do take it into the home. and then it affects the child, and the child doesn't know because the parent doesn't know, and there's this lack of coping and connection,
communication. Yeah, for sure. I definitely know. I mean, one of the coping mechanisms or coping styles that we learn is the active emotional coping mechanism. And that's where individuals talk about their feelings. And some might be comfortable with it, some might not, but it is shown that those who do communicate have a better chance of having better relationships in our lives. You know, it's just more open. And it might be uncomfortable, but honestly, how is someone supposed to know how you're feeling unless you say it? No one can read your mind. And I think I definitely struggle with that. You know, I expect my husband to listen to me or just read my mind when I'm upset, but he can't. And I shouldn't expect that of him. You know, we need to have healthy expectations of each other and healthy effort. You know, how much effort are you putting into dealing with your stress? Are you going to those resources that you have, whether it's therapy, community members, you know, activities that are given in the community that are free or really cheap that you can, you know, go to help you relieve those stresses, help you relieve those, or help you deal with those grieving feelings.
Yeah, like it can just be as simple as I just needed to tell my husband that I'm sad. Like I just need him to hold me, not fix my problems, just hold me and like, you know, pat my head and, you know, that's it. Like I just need to tell someone. Like I can't
think through it.
Think through it and like then communicate it. And that can be your first step. And that in and of itself can be so relieving and so healing just to tell someone, whether, you know, it doesn't have to be your husband. It can be like a therapist or just someone you trust and someone that's not going to judge you or make judgments about your situation or, you know, try to give you unnecessary advice. Just someone that you can go to and feel comfortable just telling them. I think it's just good to have those healthy relationships, especially for unexpected emergencies like this.
And so, you know, people go through financial struggles in life. Some families can get through it and some families can't. But what is that difference, you know? And something that we found in an article written in 2020, I think it really helps explain why some families tear apart versus others. And it says this: the attachment to the lost job, losing a sense of self, and disruption of one's identity appear to play an important role in the phenomenon. So basically grief. And I didn't really think about that, about how jobs really do help identify you. The work that you do, the successes that you have in life help create the feelings of I guess assurity and stability. But when that's gone, now you no longer have those feelings. Now your ego might be hurt, or maybe your sense of self is completely gone because you put so much time and effort into that job and now it's no longer there. You know, you put so much time and effort into building your home, now it's no longer there. You put so much time into, you know, printing out those pictures of your family and now it's gone within the flood of your home. You don't have that anymore. And that has such a big toll on your sense of self, the feelings that you have for your worth, your ability to provide for your family. It's no longer there.
Yeah, your identity is built off of what you're able to do after your struggles, like what you're able to build after your struggles. And it's not just, you know, some of the most impressive sculptures are made out of marble because it's the hardest to chip at, it's the hardest to sculpt. Like it's not easy things like Play-Doh. Like those, that's cool, you know, that's nice. But like when you see a sculpture in marble, it took a long time to get there. Like it took a long time for them to chip away at that marble little by little, to recognize those little details. And it's impressive because it's made out of marble. You know, so I think our identity is is sculpted by our hardships and sculpted by how we adapt to those hardships.
Yeah, I think we might think that our identity is marble, like nothing can tear that apart, you know. But I mean, with the pandemic that happened, so many jobs were lost, and you might think, oh, I'm stable, like my job is okay, like I am, like that's who I am, that's what I've created. Maybe 20 plus years of you trying to get at that job, that one job, whether that's you from a young age going to school to get that job. With a pandemic, that completely ruins your plan, that completely chips away and hurts you, you know. Now you have to figure out, how can I reshape my life to continue helping me feel successful, you know?
Yeah. I know for me, when coronavirus first started, I was like, oh, this will last like 2 weeks. 2 weeks max, and then I'm back to work.
Right.
Normal, whatever, like what a fluke kind of thing. But after 2 weeks, and there was no sign of going back, you start to kind of wonder, like, what's gonna happen? Am I gonna have a job? Am I ever gonna see my friends again?
Yeah.
Like, especially with any pandemic, you have to adjust, and everybody's adjusting, which makes it almost more comfortable, because everybody is kind of going through the same thing. But especially like a pandemic like coronavirus, where we couldn't see other people, and we couldn't, like, everything was so secluded and isolated, it was just difficult. We did some research and looked up some stories about specific people, and Alex Tricana said this about COVID. He said, "I didn't have a job due to COVID, and I was unable to visit my family and friends. While quarantining, I was able to renovate my bedroom, clean out the basement, and work on my car. My room has been the same forever. Renovating was refreshing and made me happy." So I think, like Alex in this example, was able to kind of restart and rebuild his identity through the things he could control. Because there's always going to be things that we can't control, and we're going to stress about those things that we can't control. But stressing about those things won't help us. And focusing on the things that we can control, and kind of renovating those things, or just appreciating those things, can help in that grieving process.
Definitely. I think going back to what you said before, the 1%, focusing on that 1%, recognizing, okay, what are the benefits out of the situation? How can I make the most of it? Even if it is just taking one step at a time, one day at a time, you know, that can help you get through those difficult times when they're pressing you down and you feel like nothing else is going to help in those situations. Just recognize that you aren't alone in that. Other people are going through the similar things, you know. I know that when I was going through a hard time, I had to tell myself, okay, other people have gone through worse. And that means that I can go through this and come out on the top, you know. And not saying that my situation was not as hard as others, and not saying that others' situations were less than mine, but I am saying that if we can tell ourselves that, yeah, this is hard, but I can do it, and I can, if I focus on the good, then I can not only come on top of the situation, but grow, learn more about myself, learn how I deal with situations, and learn what are healthy ways to deal with those situations, whether that's going to see a therapist, talking through it, you know, writing in your journal, writing anywhere, a blog, creating something that allows you to reflect on your feelings and then move past it. Those are healthy ways.
Yeah, recognizing your strength and what you can. If you can tell yourself you can accomplish something, you could probably accomplish it. Like, if you are willing to set your mind to it, then it will happen. And, like, you know, it could even be like, I can fly. And if I put my mind to it and make it happen, I will. You know, I can totally, it'll take time for me to get there and figure out how to do that. But I can, and I can recognize that strength inside of me.
Yeah. Kind of, you know, I really like how you say focusing on your strengths, because that really is what it is. You aren't made out of just your job. You aren't made out of the photos that you have in your home. You aren't made out of, you know, providing for your family, even though that might be some big, huge role that you have had for years or maybe a couple of months. That isn't just you. What are the hobbies that you enjoy? How can you build off of those hobbies? How can you build off of those activities that you like to do and make it into something better? You know, you're not stuck. There are so many doors. I mean, what's that reference? When a door closes, a window is open.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you might only have one window. Sometimes you have many windows. It's just your perspective and how you see it, you know? Are you going to look for that window, or are you going to just sit and think about how dark it is in the room, you know? Look for the light in the dark. Wherever there is darkness, there is light. And wherever there is light, there is darkness. Be prepared for those situations. Use your resources. Reach out to those that might be there for you, whether it's your spouse, your kids, you know, your mom, dad, brother, sister, community member, therapist, anything. You know, there are so many things out there that you can do and use, but it's up to you to do that.
Just with the last couple of minutes we have left, we do have some resources for specifically personal finance, and as well as like meditation resources and budgeting, and we'll link those down below. We're also going to put some of the research articles that we found interesting. We'll put those down below. And we really want those of you that are listening to focus on this. We invite you to either share this podcast with someone you know who will benefit from it, or practice it in your own life. And we want to hear about it. Like, we want to hear about your own personal experiences with grief, what it looks like in your life, what you are willing to share with us. So leave a comment down below. Like, let us know. Like, we really want to hear about your grief, and we really want to make grief comfortable and normal. So help us in doing that. We want to make it aware to everybody and make it comfortable, and it helps if everybody is on board.
Yeah, and even if you don't have any experiences or feel comfortable with sharing about your grieving situations, what are 3 things that you've learned from the resources that are linked below? Or what are 3 things that you learned from us? What are some things that stood out to you that you might be like, man, I really want to apply that to my life? Or, man, I really want to share that with my friend. Please let us know, because that really helps us understand what we're doing well, or maybe something that we could maybe focus on next time in our next podcast. Speaking of which, we'll be talking about disability in our next podcast.
Yeah, so we'll try to get that out next week, and we'll go into depth about how disability affects the family and what it does, and how to grieve with things like disability.
What are some resources for those who are grieving?
Yeah,
and hopefully make it even more normal for you guys to listen and talk about.
Yeah, so I'm grateful for grief, and grief is good. So please help us get it out there and make it comfortable.
Yeah, thank you for listening.